BTV0000412. I will talk in the next few moments about the situation in Switzerland when it comes to digitalization of the public sector and the parliament and the legislative process in particular. By training, I am a political scientist, and currently I'm working as the Chief Sales Officer of ProCivis. We are a software company providing software mainly to the public sector. Our main areas are electronic identities and related smart government services and also mobile driving licenses. My speech is structured in 4 parts. First, I will talk about the international ranking and the position of Switzerland when it comes to e-government. Secondly, I will talk about a recent national referendum which touches on these issues. Thirdly, I will talk about a project called Digital Administration Switzerland, which is a joint effort by the federal government and the other federal units to promote digitization of the public sector. And finally, I will touch on issues related to the parliament and the legislative process and how things are evolving in that space. When people think of Switzerland, often they think about the famous watches, the rich country. When we look at international rankings in terms of wealth or innovation, Switzerland often has the privilege to be ranked quite highly. And I assume that somehow the expectation would be that also when it comes to the digitalization of the public sector, Switzerland should be ranked rather high. However, and that might be a surprise, this is actually not the case. The European Union publishes each year a e-government benchmark report, and there Switzerland is always or has been ranked in the last few years on a rather low level. I do not want to be appear arrogant or anything, but somehow it is rather surprising that we are in the group of Poland, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Greece, which is on the second lowest level actually of this benchmark. There are reasons for it and for this low ranking, and I will come back to these issues during my speech again and again. I would like to mention mainly two. On the one hand, there is the curse of, in quotes, perfect analogous processes. Switzerland over the last decades has been able to establish rather good analogous services, which are fast, relatively cheap, at least compared to our wealth. And for that reason, there's little pressure to actually go digital. The other main reason for this situation is that Switzerland is a highly federalized country. Switzerland is divided in 26 cantons or states. And on the lowest level of the federal structure, we have more than 2,000 municipalities, and both the states and the municipalities differ very much in terms of size, in terms of how advanced they are in the use of technology and so on. All these federal units have over the last decades, obviously not only provided analogous services, but also have established and developed digital infrastructure. However, mainly legacy structures with proprietary source software, and considering this legacy infrastructure highly federalized, it does not come as a surprise that the interaction and the economies of scale and the benefits of digitization cannot be achieved so easily. With that, I come to my second topic, the referendum, which has taken place recently, actually, at the beginning of this month. For the first time in Switzerland, and maybe even for the first time worldwide, the electorate of Switzerland has voted on a national level on a project of digitalization. What was it all about? The government has prepared a law on electronic identities, which then has been passed by the parliament. And as Switzerland has rather well-established processes of direct democracy, a group of people have engaged in what we call an optional referendum. They demanded a vote on this law, and that has taken place on the 7th of March. It is not the place to go into the details of this law. The main dispute on this law was the question, who should be the provider of these electronic identities? The proposal by the government and the parliament was that it is not the state who is the identity provider, but that it is that there are private companies who would provide these electronic identities. Obviously regulated by the state and also in direct connection when it comes to obtaining the data from the state. However, the actual identity provider would be private. The Swiss population has voted on this law and has dramatically rejected it. About 64% of the population voted no, voted against the government, voted against the parliament, at least the majority in the parliament, voted against most of the professional associations and corporations. And it became clear that it is not yet clear what the state, what role the state has in a digitized world. And it is now a new phase of debate to actually clarify what role the state should assume in the context of electronic identities, but also in the context of other activities traditionally linked to the state. And in that sense, or in that respect, I would like to mention just two additional issues or questions. On the one hand, we have obviously, when we talk about digital topics, we have the software, which can be open or it can be proprietary. So there, this is a big question, how to move forward. But in particular, when we talk about electronic identities, there is also the question of the public key infrastructure and the question of who is owning and controlling the hardware. Are we dealing with open hardware or are we dealing with proprietary hardware, which again cannot be directly controlled by the state? So I mention all this mainly just to show how fundamental the issues are when we talk about the digitization of the state. With that, I move forward to the next topic, the third, the Digital Administration Switzerland project. The issues I'm talking about are not new. The government is aware of these problems since already quite a while and has produced a number of studies analyzing these challenges and has come up with a proposal on how to restructure the overall efforts when it comes to the digitization of the Swiss state on the federal level, on the state level, and also on the municipal level. Just recently, some major decisions have been made in that context. The approach is in 3 phases, and it has been decided to implement for the moment only the first phase, which is trying to set up a organization that is able to set standards in a more coherent way when it comes to digital approaches and digital services within the Swiss state on all three federal levels. However, it might be that this first phase is not efficient or sufficient to actually move things forward. However, the second phase would then already imply also the amendment of the federal constitution, which would have to be approved again by the citizens in a public vote. It is too early to assess or make a preview of the success of this first phase. I can just say that at least in terms of how the different federal entities will interact in this new organization, to me is not yet clear. It is also not clear how the budget, the financing of these efforts will actually occur. There are a few principles laid out. However, when we talk about major projects, it is not yet clear if this will be financed as it should be. With this, I come to the fourth and already last topic of my speech. And here I will now talk about the question or the topic of how the parliament and the legislative process is affected or is moved forward in the context of digital technology. Here I will first of all talk about the parliament itself, then about e-voting, and then I will talk about civic tech topics, and finally I will mention some projects in the context of e-collecting. First of all, the parliament. Switzerland has two houses on the federal level, such as most other modern democracies. In the first lockdown last year, in March, I believe it was, or the first lockdown was decided during a session of the parliament, with the result that in the middle of the session, the parliament has had to close and was basically inactive. The summer session, maybe I should mention in that context, the Swiss parliament, also on the federal level, is not a professional parliament. It is a parliament where it is expected or normal that the parliamentarians have a profession and do the parliamentary work only part-time. And they unite in 4 sessions, 1 month each during the year. So during the summer session, the parliament was again able to unite. However, they could not do so in the traditional space, since the social distancing rules could not be enforced or lived up with. So they had a session in a huge conference location somewhere else in the capital of Switzerland, in Bern. Since the fall, spring, and currently there is also a session, the parliament is again sitting in the traditional parliament building, using all kinds of masks and other stuff to make sure that corona is not spread out more than unavoidably. Why is that so? The rules of the parliament are in part defined in the federal constitution, and the federal constitution foresees that the parliament has to sit physically in order to be able to take decisions. It is not possible that the federal parliament could interact and decide online. For that, the federal constitution would have to be amended by the Swiss citizens. the parliament itself cannot change this rule. And obviously the change of the constitution is not something that can be made quickly. The committees of the parliament, however, they can sit also online, and this is now practiced quite regularly. It is not yet clear how this will evolve. There are a number of projects pending in the parliament and also with the government to improve this situation. However, no clear direction is yet to be identified. Secondly, I will now talk about e-voting. As you might have realized, the Swiss citizens have quite an important role in the legislative process of Switzerland. We do not only elect our parliamentarians, we also, as citizens, have a say in specific topics, such as all amendments of the constitution, or also a referenda on laws and international treaties and so on. With other words, voting is something important and something that takes place regularly. Traditionally, voting has taken place only at polling stations. However, since about 30 years or so, it is possible to vote also by mail, postal mail. And nowadays, about 80 or even 90% of the population is actually voting by mail and is not going to the polling stations anymore, which obviously from a pandemic point of view is the preferred way of voting. However, due to the fact that polling stations still have to open so that people can also vote this way, during lockdown, no votings could take place, which slowed down the overall process quite a bit. For that reason, but also for other reasons, already in the year 2000, projects have been started and tests have been started to use e-voting infrastructures. With other words, the possibility to vote online via the internet. This again would be a rather interesting topic that could be covered in a speech on its own. To cut the long story short, while these tests have been taking place since 2000, and in the beginning, a number of different providers have been available for this infrastructure. The complexity has increased over the year, and the number of providers has decreased logically. And in the end, it was only the Swiss Post which was providing one of these infrastructures. And in 2019, the Post made a bounty program on its source code, and major issues have been identified by white hackers, and consequently the Post has decided to withdraw its services, and currently it is not possible to vote online anymore. Due to all these developments, the federal government has rearranged its strategy in terms of the e-voting, and it is expected that there will be public consultations this year again on how to move forward. So also in this area, things are not clear, or at least are under construction, let's put it that way. With that, I come to the topic of civic tech. There I would like to mention a quite interesting report that the federal government has published last year, and actually it's also available in English, so I would highly recommend it to you. It's quite nice overview, not only on general topics of civic tech and the challenges that they pose to a democratic state, be it Switzerland or some other. So I think it's also quite relevant to the international public. And this report also proposes 3 areas where the federal government would like to invest and move forward. Uh, they are, first of all, the federal government is now in the process of establishing a what they call a data model for which is covering the whole policy cycle, which then would allow to uh, document, search, and so on, documents and laws and so on, seamlessly covering the whole policy cycle. There, this data model should be based on the web ontology language. So there, the idea is to really um, prepare the foundations of a digital environment in which all matters related to the policy cycle can be displayed. Secondly, more specifically, one part or one phase of the policy cycle are public consultations. They normally take place once a first draft of a law has been published, and anybody actually can already today opine on these proposals. These public consultations currently are taking place in a rather unstructured fashion, and there the idea is to use digital technology to enhance and simplify and make the process more efficient. And thirdly, the federal government is also investing or investigating on how the right to petition can be transferred into the digital realm. With that, I come to the last topic in this fourth section, e-collecting. E-collecting in our context refers to the act of signing a popular initiative or referendum. Uh, Most of the votes that are taking place in which the citizens can participate are triggered by the citizens themselves. And so far, this triggering is taking place or is done by signature, analogous signatures, signatures on paper, which then have to be verified by the municipalities, counted, and so on. Rather labor-intensive process, and it is obvious that with digital infrastructure, this could be simplified quite a bit. For a number of reasons, the federal government is not pushing this topic forward. However, on the canton level, or I should say maybe on the state level, a number of projects are currently being prepared and in progress. And I think that will be quite an interesting topic to observe. I'm also somehow involved in these activities. With that, I come to my conclusion. We have seen that Switzerland, in terms of international rankings, when it comes to e-government and also when it comes to the digitization of the parliamentary work or the legislative process, be it e-voting, e-collecting, civic tech, and so on, still has a lot of room of improvement. The government is aware that things have to move forward. It has first initial ideas. In parallel, as I just mentioned, the civil society is also active, coming up with solutions, and it will be very interesting to observe and also participate in this process in the coming years. With that, I would like to conclude. Feel free to reach out to me if you have specific questions. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, I guess, rather easily. And otherwise, thank you for your attention and bye-bye.